Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. The title, The Brave and the Bold, has gone through several volumes over the years, and is often associated with putting together DC characters that don't generally interact. It's even where the Justice League of America was first formed.
Outrageous!
But the original title from the 1950s not only involved characters you may not have heard of, they each had their own adventures and never really interacted. In particular, these characters were the Golden Gladiator, Viking Prince, and Silent Knight. Featured heroes of the title for many issues, sometimes one stepping aside so DC could write up a Robin Hood story or something. Today, I'm taking issue with The Brave and the Bold #1, and it's superhero-free fare. So let's see if this comic makes us want to turn the page, or turn our heads. The cover features panels of each starring character, like the Golden Gladiator in a chariot race, looking mildly irritated at being attacked with a sword, the Viking Prince cutting up a ship's sail and smiling like he hopes his buddy is recording this awesome prank, and the Silent Knight breaking an opponent's sword. Snark aside, it does a good job of featuring what to expect, and show the more exciting scenes to draw readers in. But since they had some space left, they give you an invitation. If you dream of riding a thundering chariot, if you yearn to explore the unknown seas, if you are ready to wield a clashing sword to guard an astonishing secret. I had a dream where I couldn't use the non-Green Lantern Corps rings because I couldn't recite their oaths, and the Red Lantern ring was just a red Christmas light. Does that count? Then, the Golden Gladiator, the Viking Prince, and the Silent Knight invite you to join them in blazing adventures from now on as a member of The Brave and the Bold. Wow, these labor unions are going all out for incentives, aren't they? We start with a preview page featuring the Gladiator, written by Ed Herron, with art by Russ Heath. The image is just a larger version of the panel from the cover, and a paragraph setting up how gold played a part in his backstory. What is he, the Roman Scrooge McDuck? In a city on the outskirts of ancient Rome, a parched shepherd boy stops to get a drink from a fountain when he sees the reflection of a soldier behind him and is knocked out between panels. He later wakes up in a dungeon, accused of attempted murder of Claudius Crassus, the guy nearby being treated for his wounds. I guess he was thinking, screw immediate medical attention and hygienic circumstances, I want to be around when my alleged assailant wakes up. He's a praetor, a governmental magistrate that commands an army and handles various judicial responsibilities, and an attempt on his life is a capital offense. The shepherd recognizes Cinna, the soldier accusing him, and pleads innocent, but is promptly slapped and ignored. Claudius is so jazzed that he didn't get killed. Instead of executing the accused, he'll be put into a slave galley. After he leaves, Cinna and one of his underlings openly confess they tried to kill the praetor, but were interrupted when guards were closing in, and the shepherd was just conveniently nearby to frame. With little fear he'll return, he orders the goon to take him to the galleys.
"Aye, crafty Cinna!"
He's not called that because of his diabolical schemes, but because of his thriving Etsy business, making pillows shaped like Roman helmets. The shepherd is later on a ship, rowing the boat with several other slaves, but narration pointing out how, over time, this got him really fit and muscular. This is how we fight obesity, people! Instead of driving cars that run on gas, we should just row from place to place. Eventually, the vessel is on its way back to Rome, when one of the several captured lions escapes and advances on the slave driver. "Jupiter, help us!" Yeah, I think this definitely counts as a single Sailor Scout job, and I think the one that throws lightning would be a better choice than the Bubble Lady. Fearing the slaves would be harmed, the shepherd breaks free of his chains and uses them against the lion, appearing to have killed it. Maybe knocked it out, but narration doesn't specify. For his bravery, he's sold as a gladiator for 1,000 gold pieces, and it's here that we finally learn his name is Marcus. And he's apparently been called Marcus the Mighty off-panel. While at gladiator school, fortunately that lion he took out was going to be his midterm, so he breezed right through that. He finds his new master is none other than Cinna, the soldier that framed him, and now plans to silence him for good at the hands of the gladiator Caius, slayer of 200 men in the arena. We don't see our hero actually learning or training in the school as we go to the start of this battle. While getting netted looks bad for him at first, Marcus soon turns the tables and gets his opponent in a headlock for the win. Praetor Claudius actually liked seeing Caius's winning streak end, and decides to let him live just so he can be angry at Marcus, who acquiesces, but he's a slave, so he hasn't got much choice, does he? Cinna is in the audience with his niece Lucia, who worries that Marcus is too injured to continue. Indication enough that there'll likely be a relationship between these two. I'm not one for shipping characters, it's just kind of obvious. She's the only woman in the story to be named so far, she's unusually concerned for the hero she knows nothing about, and being related to the villain fits into one or more romance tropes. Using a spear Cinna knows is weakened, Marcus's next opponent is a bull. He vaults onto the beast, breaking his spear in the process, and is about to be crushed against the wall, much to Lucia's worry and Cinna's delight. However, Marcus manages to wrestle the bovine to the ground. Somewhere in the panel gutters, I guess, since narration implies he overpowered it somehow. All things considered, Marcus had less trouble fighting a bull than Bugs Bunny.
Of course you realize this means war.
Soldier announces that winning gladiators will compete in a chariot race, and by the Praetor's edict, the victor will be freed and win the Golden Gladiator Award. But, ever the devious so-and-so, Cinna has paid the best charioteer, Cotta, to ensure Marcus's luck doesn't last. Yeah, slaves. They get all the luck, don't they? A friend we've never seen before, Crixus, is concerned Marcus is too weak to compete, but he's determined to race even if all he has is a shield. That too was planned by Cinna, while the smug Cotta brags to himself about having a mace. When the competition begins, he attacks Marcus with his sword, until he gets a face full of shield, causing the chariot to tip over and lose him the race. That mace you never used sure came in handy, didn't it, Skippy? Marcus subsequently wins to the cheers of the crowd, and is later awarded both his freedom and the title of Golden Gladiator, which comes with a pure gold helmet. The body armor is gold-colored. It's actually made of paperboard, because it's really just meant to look shiny. Budget cuts and all that. The story ends with Lucia wanting to meet Marcus, and her Uncle Cinna vowing to kill him eventually. We then get an ad for the readers guaranteeing that DC is the best comic reading around. Guarantee void after August 2011. The next tale features the Viking Prince, which again features his panel from the cover, but looking a lot more worried than happy as he tears into that sail with all those warriors beneath him. He just remembered he forgot to put on his underwear this morning. Written by Robert Kanigher, also executive editor on the book, with art by Joe Kubert, it's 964 AD, when fishermen on a skiff off the coast of Norway spot someone adrift in the choppy waters.
"Captain Olaf, look! A man! Pick him up! I want to give him a warm hug!"
Bringing the young man aboard, they find he has no memory of who he is or where he's from. They take him home, where he talks with the captain's daughter, Gunda, appreciating everything they've done for him. They're watched by someone lurking nearby.
"'Tis the youth, alive! The mighty Thorvald will reward Sardluck the spy for this choice news. Then Sardluck the spy can finally afford a therapist to explain why he refers to himself in the third person and his profession in his own inner monologue."
Arriving at the Baron's stronghold, he reveals what he learned, and is ordered to take some guards to slay the lad or be killed himself. That's managerial motivation for you. They soon reach the fishing village, demanding to know where the traitor is, and are soon ensnared by a net thrown by their quarry. All but Sardluck the spy, anyway. Gunda throws the amnesiac a sword so he can defend himself, which he does quite effectively, knocking his opponent's weapons away. Peasants and fishermen are forbidden the use of weapons, but I seem to remember handling a blade before. Am I Viking Jason Bourne? When the guards free themselves, he leads them to a narrow seawall, so they can't all attack at once. But when his sword breaks, he makes use of a nearby barrel to knock his pursuers into the water. Am I Donkey Kong? As long as none of these guys is an Italian plumber, I think I've got a chance. Stranger returns to the village victorious, and Gunda says that for his bravery and skill, they'll name him John after the legendary Viking prince of old. I thought perhaps this was based on an actual legend of John the Shining, but it doesn't appear so. Anyway, he's honored, but still wouldn't mind knowing his real name. It's understandable that he'd want his memories back, know what kind of life he had before he was found adrift, but it does feel exceedingly disrespectful to say that right after being given a name they hold in high regard and worthy of honor. I bet this response would tick off plenty of Klingons, too. Thorvald finds out that his goons failed and decides to deal with the youth himself. After a few days, upon hearing the fishermen are out at sea, he sets out on his own vessel.
My dragon ship is fleeter than the fisherman's, and laden with men and arms. Also, a few legs and a torso. We've got all sorts of body parts, some of them even connected to each other.
Though kinda weird how he's smacking his minion here, saying he'll handle the task of killing John himself, but waits until he hears he's out at sea. Sure, maybe he's got a strategy. He even says his ship could smash a fishing boat, but he also could have rowed into the village if he really wanted to, right? Anyway, aboard the fishing boat, John has been teaching the villagers how to fight, using the swords they retrieved from Thorvald's men. One nice detail, if you look closely, is that the swords are wrapped up, so no one gets themselves hurt or killed while simply sparring. His skills lead the chief to wonder if the lad was ever a soldier, or possibly royalty. They stop training for now, so John can learn to fish, including the operation of an enormous crossbow used for whaling, able to fire a harpoon with the weight of a man. Though by the look of that spear, I'm assuming he's talking about a very tall and malnourished man. The lookout warns of the dragon ship approaching, and despite evasive maneuvers, they're struck and lose their sail. Another hit like that and they'll sink.
Why wait for death? I have a plan.
Oh, the waiting game sucks. Let's play Hungry Hungry Hippos.
John places himself into the big crossbow and has his compatriots launch him at the attacking ship. It works, the newcomer flying through the air and catching the enemy's sail and cutting it on his way down, much like the cover, though with a much more serious look on his face.
Here is where you lose your head, fool!
Not if my feet can help me. Am I one of the Rockettes?
Unable to outrun the enemy, John grabs one of the ropes to the sail and cuts it, pulling him upward. This has worked to distract the enemy long enough for the fishermen to board and join the battle. Apparently recognizing Thorvald, John asks why the Baron has been after him, which is answered by a sword thrown into the mast near his head before the villain dives into the water to escape.
You'll never learn from me! My teaching methods are terribly ineffective. School boards are always on my back about burning and pillaging my students' villages.
Thorvald's men surrender, and the dragon ship now belongs to the fishermen, planning to use it to fight tyranny and be free again. The story ends in the next panel, where Gunda praises John's leadership as he once again wonders about his past, promising that if Thorvald survived, he'll be made to reveal John's true identity. Behold, John, Viking prince of not being able to take a freaking compliment. Next, we get a couple pages that are sort of a romanticized summation about Vikings, how they visited North America before Columbus, had helmets with the horns of beasts, which isn't actually true, and didn't fear death because they believed dying in battle would earn them a place in Valhalla, where they can fight, hunt, and feast for eternity. It features Thorvald, the villain from the previous story, and naturally leaves out the more, unsavory things that we know Vikings did around that time. Next is a single-page comic called Binky Says, where a kid named Allergy had an idea for a new soapbox racer for an upcoming derby, but gives up on it because he thinks the other fellows will laugh at him. They're probably already laughing at you because your name's Allergy, and have a bow tie that's obnoxiously large, even for a comic book. Seriously, look at that thing. Enough wind could send him into the next town. Anyway, his friend, I assume the titular Binky, tells him about a couple kids from Ohio who were laughed at when they built a new kind of sled, but its sleeker design outperformed older models. Over the years, they continued working on new ideas and designs, some failing, but eventually they built a plane that could fly for nearly 40 minutes. They were Orville and Wilbur Wright, and their fearlessness to innovate inspires Allergy to build his new racer. This page is published as a public service in cooperation with leading national social welfare and youth-serving organizations. And you know they really want you to take this motivational story seriously because both characters are named like their parents either really hated them or were just plain lazy. Next are a few pages of prose about the Roman legionnaires. Maybe it's educational, I can't comment on its accuracy, and I kinda skipped it because this review is long enough as it is. On to the final story about The Silent Knight, also written by Robert Kanigher, with art by Irv Novick. We begin with a joust between two knights who jointly ruled a kingdom far south of the Thames, Sir Oswald Bain and Sir Edwin Kent. Dual monarchies have been pretty rare, but historically not unheard of, from what little I've read. Over the course of the match, Kent's lance breaks against his opponent's shield. Swiftly, my father drew his sword to continue the contest, and Sir Oswald followed suit, according to the laws of chivalry. Winner gets to hold open a door for a lady and cover a puddle with their raincoat for her, too. However, Kent's sword becomes warped, and Oswald takes the opportunity to deal a swipe to his chest. Then Sir Oswald's sword glittered in the sun and came down with a crash that stopped my heart. Though, according to my doctor, the 7 chili dogs and 3 feet of funnel cake may have contributed as well. Our narrator, Brian Kent, rushes to his father's side, promising to uncover the reason for this mischief. Yeah, maybe the word had a different connotation at the time, or at least when this was written, but in modern parlance, it kind of downplays deadly sabotage. Edwin tells his son to look after the people when he's old enough to rule, be kind, just, and merciful, then passes away. Brian could feel Oswald's icy stare as he says that these things are to be expected in this kind of tournament, and he's totally upset that this happened to his dad. You can tell by the way he's just staying on his horse and basically says, that's how it goes. Brian keeps a calm demeanor, head held high as he walks past onlookers whispering about what'll happen to the prince with his father gone, suspicion that Oswald was behind the accidents in the duel, and that without noble Edwin, they're left with the remaining ruler's iron fist. You mean the guy in an old comic whose last name is Bane might be the bad guy? Brian waited until no one was around and began crying at the loss of his father. This is actually a really good panel, despite him being colored the same as the grass he's lying on. Using the word alone in different contexts at first to indicate nobody else is present, and that with his father gone, he has no comfort or support. Orphaned at 15. Brian Kent, DC Comics' oldest orphan. Look at the chiseled jaw on this guy. 15? Yeah, plus a good decade. Anyhow, Oswald decides to enroll Brian as an apprentice in knighthood until he's proven worthy to rule at his side. My tutor, Sir Grot, gnarled as an oak and as tough. Though, to be fair, his great-grandmother was an ent. The knight was a difficult taskmaster, constantly berating Brian even if he did something well, like accidentally winning a joust or attributing a perfectly shot arrow more to the wind's assistance. Puzzling to the young lad, since he thought this guy was his dad's friend. His protestations got him the flat of a sword to his behindus, but it's noted that Brian is the first not to get knocked down by such a punishment, so that's something? Yet, even when he finally learned fencing, relying on his speed and quick footwork to get the better of bigger, stronger opponents, it still wasn't enough to impress Sir Grot. The old man even insists to Oswald that Brian's a hopeless case, but the ruler tells him to keep trying so no one can say he didn't do the best he could for Edwin's son. Later, Grot is teaching Brian about the various birds of prey in their possession, one named Slasher being the most difficult among them. He gets startled and flies away, so Brian heads out to retrieve him.
Sir Oswald values him more than a fortune. He also didn't get Slasher insured, so you can understand why he'd be angry about losing him.
He follows the hawk into the nearby Forest Perilous, where he'd never ventured before. The bird seems to fly lazily, likened to an autumn leaf riding the wind as they venture deeper into the woods until stopping at a tree branch. One that just so happens to have a suit of armor hanging from it. Brian, looking younger than 15 in this panel, quickly tries it on, I guess thinking this is a dream and best gets suited up before he wakes. He's amazed at how well the armor fits and the balance of the sword, as if they were customized just for him. But somewhere nearby is a knight wandering around in his long johns, getting lost in the woods, trying to find his gear after he had to go to the bathroom. Hearing a call for help, he confronts Sir Oswald's men-at-arms menacing a woman and her father. They ask his name, to properly mark his grave, but he doesn't speak, so they can't recognize his voice. They derisively call him Silent Knight and attack with their swords, so he'll be a Holy Knight. However, Brian defends and uses his swiftness to outmaneuver his first foe. The second almost gets the drop on him, but Slasher swoops in for an assist. Kinda weird how each goon calls him the Silent Knight. Maybe it's the writer trying to cement it into the readers' heads, but it also feels like the first one said it and then the other two thought it was so good they tried to piggyback on the cleverness, like they also thought of it. The third and final enemy has his sword at Brian's throat, ready to cut his breath in two, which doesn't sound as witty as I think he was hoping. Our hero unexpectedly swings upward, then parries to relieve him of his weapon until he gives up. I guess the prince in disguise just up and let those guys go, because we later see him escorting the woman and her dad to safety, where she thanks the Silent Knight. Hey, word-of-mouth marketing really does work. And she can hear how his heart speaks to hers. Wow, cardiology was really intense back in those days.
Are you a real doctor or a doctor like Dr. Pepper's a doctor?
Brian leaves the suit back where he found it until he needs it again, because what are the odds of someone else stumbling across it in the forest and deciding to do some medieval vigilantism? He later returns with Slasher to Sir Grot, who tells him about the great new fighter, Silent Knight, then asks where his charge got all scratched up. The story ends with Brian saying he might have stumbled into some thorns in the Forest Perilous, with a dopey smile and all but winking at the reader.
Verily, something has bewitched your face, boy. Mayhaps you have the fever upon you. I'll get the bucket of leeches, then.
Then there's this strip about two characters, Maximus and Minimus, in a chariot race, and the crowd thinking they're fighting, but they're actually playing some kind of rock-paper-scissors style game. I cannot say it left me in stitches. Then there's this ad I just found interesting. A gorilla escapes its zoo enclosure, but is quickly coaxed back inside by a little boy with an air rifle and a little girl with a bow and arrow. Police arrive to thank Jim and Judy and ask where they got those wonderful toys. They respond that they earned them selling Cloverine brand salve. Not a lot of people were buying, so we had to hire some muscle to encourage more sales, so then we had to sell more salve, and we're basically the mafia now. A different kid is so impressed, he's going to join in on salve selling to get some of this sweet swag, like flashlights, ukuleles, pearls, a deep fryer, and a live pony. Now I'm curious if anyone ever sold enough to win their own small horse. Anyway, these stories were actually pretty good, and I say that as someone that has found reading some older stories rather tedious. Mostly it's the dialogue and the narration, how often they will explain what we're seeing to the point that it sometimes feels unnecessary. But I can't excuse it because the medium was still fairly new at the time, which is also why I'm giving something of a pass to the in-between panel time skips where weeks or months could have passed, but they don't really indicate how much. Some tropes and traits were more excusable then than it would be today, depending on the context. Though one way the industry was different was the lack of credited creative teams for their respective stories. I had to consult a DC wiki for the names of the writers and artists. The art, by the way, is actually really good, faces looking very realistic, like they were off-model or based on actual people, and great detail on the Roman armor, in particular Cinna's, though John's expression when he narrowly avoids face impalement seems a bit odd to me. Maybe he was mid-sneeze and the involuntary head movement is how he dodged the sword. These character origins were done really well. A framed shepherd that fought to free himself from slavery, with his former master determined to kill him. It sets up Marcus to not only outwit and perhaps try to expose Cinna, but to prove his innocence to the Praetor. A mysterious man searching for his past, unsure if he's worthy of a legendary namesake, but still knowing right from wrong. Incidentally, if you saw the Justice League Unlimited episode To Another Shore, this is the guy whose body Gorilla Grodd was after to gain invulnerability. I haven't read beyond this issue, but according to Wikipedia, later writers of Viking Prince seem to ignore much of what was set up, some even just making him an actual prince, son of King Rick. I actually got the feeling they were already setting him up to be revealed as the John the Shining. If only because it's the kind of twist that they were not so subtle about alluding to, with how great a fighter he was, and wondering if he was royalty in his old life, like a chosen one with amnesia. Then there's the orphan trying to uncover the reason for his father's death. They never explain why they had the kingdom's two rulers duke it out in combat. I thought that was left to the not rich and powerful, but what do I know? It's clear they're suggesting Edwin's demise was a plot by Sir Oswald, seeing as how he didn't look too broken up, and training Brian could be for appearances. But if a writer wanted to subvert expectations, they could say that, yeah, Ozzy's a lousy ruler, but he didn't really want to kill Edwin, and someone in his court is trying to frame him. I could also see Grott's style of teaching, let's say, be that old tactic of seeming dissatisfied to make his student work harder to better himself, which, in real life, has every opportunity to backfire and plunge a student into an inescapable pit of self-doubt, misery, and crippling depression. But what would I know about anything like that? I also suspect Grott recognizes how good Brian is, but lies to Oswald in order to protect the boy, fearing he'll be killed before he can take the throne or sire an heir. Further, maybe Grott's the one that made the armor and sword for Brian, and Slasher was trained to lead him to it when the time was right. All speculation, granted, and I don't exactly plan to follow up on these stories anytime soon. But aside from the writing styles being a product of their time and some corny ads and unrelated strips, the main stories were good starting off points for these more obscure characters. Though some might consider them equally noble and good and virtuous, with mostly their backstories and nothing else to differentiate them. But, well, for the time period, what should we expect from a title called The Brave and the Bold? I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.